Imagine a world without streetlights. A world where night was not a pause between days, but a living thing that breathed and watched. The sun sinks behind the hills, and darkness spills slowly through the trees. The last fire in the village flickers against rough timber walls. Beyond that, there is nothing but silence, and the sound of the wind moving through branches. Before the modern age, fear was not something people escaped. It was a companion, quiet, invisible, ever-present. It kept them cautious, made them pray, and taught them stories to explain what they couldn't see. Fear built habits, closing doors before dusk, murmuring blessings when candles burned low, whispering names of saints and ancestors when the night seemed too still. It wasn't always terror. Sometimes it was simply awareness, a soft reminder of how small and fragile human life was against the vastness of the unknown. Tonight, we will drift gently through that ancient landscape of fear, not to be frightened, but to understand it. We'll move slowly, without judgment, across centuries when the world was quieter, darker, and infinitely larger. Fear shaped the rhythm of every life, how people worked, how they worshipped, how they slept. Our journey will unfold in 4 calm chapters. We'll begin among ordinary people, peasants and villagers who faced darkness, disease, and superstition every day. Then, we'll follow the life of someone whose world was changed by fear, a witch, a healer, or a survivor of plague. After that, we'll wander through the mysteries that gave fear its shape, curses, omens, and rituals meant to tame the unseen. And finally, we'll look toward those who seemed untouched by it, the nobles, the priests, and the rulers who built their comfort on the anxieties of others. As you listen, let your breath slow. Let the quiet expand between each image. Fear, after all, isn't always loud. It lives in pauses, in waiting, in wondering, in the moment before you understand what you're hearing. It hums softly beneath everything, like the low note of a distant drum. Now, close your eyes. Picture a single candle burning in a wooden cottage. Its flame trembles against the darkness. Outside, a dog barks once and then falls silent. You hear nothing but your own breath and the faint rustle of wind against the shutters. This is where our story begins, in a time when fear was not a stranger, but a neighbor. The year is 1352. You live in a small village of thatched roofs and muddy lanes. Beyond the fields lies an endless forest, and beyond that, only more silence. There are no lamps along the road, no city glow beyond the trees, only the slow fade of daylight into total darkness. As dusk approaches, people hurry home. Doors are barred, shutters drawn. The smell of wood smoke fills the air. Chickens rustle in their coops, and somewhere a child is being called inside by a tired voice. You can feel the world changing as the sun sinks. Day belongs to work, but night belongs to something older, something watching, waiting, and not entirely friendly. Inside your cottage, a single tallow candle flickers. The air is heavy with its scent, thick, slightly sweet and smoky. Its light dances across rough walls, barely reaching the corners. You sit close to the warmth, aware of the vast blackness pressing against your small circle of glow. Every sound outside feels sharper now, the creak of a tree, the crack of a twig, the distant cry of an owl. You tell yourself it's only the wind. Everyone tells themselves that. For people of the past, darkness wasn't simply an absence of light. It was a presence. It carried weight. It whispered. It was a space where anything might exist. Wolves, yes, but also spirits. The restless souls of the dead, demons. The night wasn't empty, it was crowded. Sleep didn't come easily. In these centuries, most people didn't sleep in one long stretch. They had what was called a first sleep and a second sleep. Between them, for an hour or two, they would wake to tend the fire, pray, or simply lie still and listen. Those were the hours when fear came closest. People believed that in the deep of night, the world of the living and the world of spirits overlapped. It was wise not to wander then. You can almost see it, a man rising from bed to fetch water, whispering a short prayer as he opens the door, his breath visible in the cold air. The silence outside feels almost alive. Somewhere in the trees, a shape shifts. He steps back inside quickly and bolts the door. His heart slows again, and he thanks the saints under his breath. The villagers lived between two worlds, one they could see and one they could sense. Fear was not random. It had structure. It was explained through faith and superstition, through 1,000 tiny rituals meant to keep it away. A sprig of herbs tied above the door, a cross carved into the threshold, a charm whispered over the first water drawn at dawn. Small gestures, repeated so often they became muscle memory. By day, fear changed shape but never disappeared. The fields carried their own quiet anxieties, the risk of failed harvests, sick animals, sudden storms. A single bad year could mean hunger for all. When crops failed, people whispered about curses or divine punishment. When illness spread, they blamed spirits or strangers. Fear was never meaningless. It always had a reason. And in finding reasons, people found comfort. Inside the church, fear was transformed into holiness. The painted walls showed angels and demons locked in eternal balance. The priest's voice echoed through cool stone as he spoke of sin, salvation, and judgment. The message was clear. To fear God was to be wise. Even faith had its shadows. Sometimes fear had no clear shape at all, only a feeling that the world was fragile, that safety was temporary. When a storm rolled across the fields and lightning split the sky, families knelt together, eyes closed, murmuring old prayers as rain hammered against the roof. The wind moaned through the cracks, and every flash of light revealed the familiar world turned strange and wild. Yet, there was a strange peace in this life of quiet fear. Because to them, fear wasn't a failure. It was part of existence. They didn't try to banish it. They lived with it, like weather. It came and went, and they adapted. As night deepens, the candle burns low. You lie on a straw mattress, the faint warmth of the fire flickering nearby. Shadows move softly along the walls. Outside, the forest is alive with sound. Branches swaying, leaves trembling, small unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. You pull your blanket closer and close your eyes. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then is still. The world settles into silence again. You breathe slowly, listening to the rhythm of your own heart. Fear is there, quiet and familiar, resting beside you like an old friend. It doesn't wake you, it watches over you. And as the night stretches onward, you understand why people once filled their days with prayer and ritual. Not because they were simple, but because they lived so close to the edge of the unknown. They feared the dark, yes, but they also respected it, and in that respect they found balance. The candle fades, the last light trembles, then dies. Outside, the stars are endless, and the world, though full of unseen things, is finally still. Imagine living in a world where illness has no name, where the boundaries between health and sickness are uncertain, and where a cough, a rash, or the sudden stillness of a neighbor's home could mean the work of nature or of something darker. It is the early 1600s. You live in a small village surrounded by forests and fog, where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp soil. The days pass quietly, and every life is tied to the land, the weather, and the will of forces no one fully understands. Lately, the village has been uneasy. A strange illness has begun to spread, moving from one home to another like a cold wind. People whisper that it began after a traveler passed through, or perhaps because of a bad omen seen in the sky, a red moon, a comet, the cry of an owl at noon. The priest has been walking from house to house with a small silver cross, sprinkling holy water and muttering Latin prayers under his breath. Doors close when he passes. Mothers hold their children tightly. The world feels smaller than ever, as though the sky itself has drawn closer. In this quiet dread, people begin to look for reasons. Fear, when it cannot find logic, creates its own. Someone must be responsible. Someone must have caused the misfortune that has settled over the village like mist. At first, the suspicion is soft, only words exchanged behind hands. But soon, a name emerges. Annalise. She is an old woman who lives at the edge of the fields, where the trees begin to thicken and shadows stretch long across the grass. She gathers herbs for healing and speaks little, her eyes sharp and her back bent with age. For years she's been part of the village, but apart from it, a figure of quiet usefulness and quiet unease. You remember visiting her once. The air inside her cottage smelled of rosemary and smoke. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling. A small black cat watched from the corner as she mixed powders and whispered under her breath. She never frightened you exactly, but she seemed to belong to a different rhythm than everyone else. Something older, slower, more connected to the secrets of the earth. When the sickness began, people remembered that difference. They remembered her alone in the field, speaking to herself. They remembered her charms, her strange muttering. Memory is fertile soil for fear. One evening, as the sun bleeds into the horizon and fog rolls low across the fields, you see a group of villagers walking down the path toward her home. They carry torches that hiss in the damp air, the light glinting off their faces. No one speaks. The sound of boots on wet ground is the only rhythm. When they reach her door, they stop. Someone knocks, someone whispers a prayer, then another knocks harder. And in that brief, breathless silence, something ancient awakens, the need to act when the unknown feels too close. Annalise is taken away that night. You don't see what happens, only the flicker of torches moving back through, the fog, and the sound of distant voices fading into the dark. The next morning, her house stands empty. The cat is gone. The doors open. And though no one says it aloud, everyone knows that something irreversible has happened. The fear in the village does not disappear. It deepens. Because now people realize that the sickness has not stopped, even after the accused has gone. And that is the most frightening thing of all. For centuries, this pattern repeated. When fear had no shape, people gave it one. When they could not fight nature, they fought each other. The witch hunts were born from that quiet desperation to make sense of suffering, to assign a name to the darkness. The witches themselves were rarely powerful or strange. They were merely different. And difference, in times of fear, can feel like danger. Years pass. The plague returns as if carried on the breath of the wind itself. In towns and cities, bells toll every hour. The streets grow empty. People stay indoors, lighting candles against the unseen. The smell of smoke, herbs, and sickness fills the air. Death is not loud. It is patient. It moves quietly from one door to another, like a shadow with purpose. When the Black Death came to Europe in the 14th century, no one understood it. Doctors wore beaked masks filled with herbs, believing the scent would protect them. Priests spoke of divine punishment. Others blamed poisoned wells or foreign travelers. People looked to the sky for signs, comets, storms, strange alignments of stars, anything that could turn chaos into meaning. It was not just a disease, it was a mystery too vast for reason. Imagine standing at the edge of a village then, the air heavy, the church bells tolling somewhere beyond the hills, smoke rising from fires meant to purify the air. You can almost hear the wheels of a cart carrying the bodies of the dead, wrapped in sheets. Yet through that stillness, Life continues. A child laughs faintly somewhere, a dog barks, a door creaks open and closes again. Fear has not stopped the world, it has changed the way it moves. The most haunting part of those centuries is not the suffering, but the quiet endurance. People did not live in constant terror, they adapted. They learned to live with fear, to weave it into the rhythm of existence. They prayed at sunrise, they buried their dead at sunset, and they looked to tomorrow with weary hope. In their fear, they found structure, a pattern that kept the mind steady. To fear was to be alive, to still feel the pulse of the world around them. You picture a small family inside a cottage. The father sits near the fire, sharpening a tool that will never be used again. The mother hums softly while stirring a pot of thin soup. A child asks a question, her voice curious, not frightened. "Will it come here?" she says. The mother looks toward the window, where the night presses close, and answers only, "We'll stay warm tonight." The fire crackles. The child falls asleep. The father stares into the flames as if they might reveal something. He knows what they all know, that no prayer, no herb, no wisdom can stop what's coming. But still, he watches the fire, because light, even small and flickering, is a promise. In the centuries that followed, fear slowly changed shape. Science began to replace superstition, but even then, the shadows never vanished. The unknown simply moved, from the forest to the body to the mind. The line between fear and faith, between reason and ritual, has always been thin. Fear was not only about survival, it was about meaning. The witch hunts, the plague rituals, the whispered prayers, they were all ways to turn chaos into order, to make the world comprehensible. Even when people burned others at the stake or rang church bells to chase away invisible poison, they were really trying to find peace in a world that refused to explain itself. And so, when you look back across these dark centuries, try not to see monsters or madness. See humanity, lost, frightened, but still reaching for light. The villagers with their torches, the priests with their prayers, the healers with their herbs, all of them trying in their own quiet ways to make the unknown a little less vast. Outside your imaginary cottage now, the fog has thinned. The torches have gone out. Morning is coming, soft and pale, breaking through the branches of bare trees. The world is still there. Fear is still there, but it feels gentler in daylight, like a memory that lingers just long enough to remind you of what it means to be human, aware, uncertain, and endlessly searching for safety in an untamable world. And so, through centuries, people named their fears. In the ancient world, fear was not the enemy of faith. It was its foundation. The Egyptians built entire rituals around it. They feared not just death, but the chaos that came after it, the long journey through the Duat, the underworld of shadows and trials. To calm that fear, they created maps for the soul, inscribed on papyrus, tucked beside the dead. They spoke spells meant to guide the spirit safely past serpents and gates of fire. Fear became architecture, pyramids rising from the desert like great promises that nothing truly ends, that even in the unknown there is order, if you know the words. Thousands of miles away, the Greeks turned fear into stories. They told of gods who punished pride, who sent storms for arrogance, and plagues for disobedience. Yet, even as they feared their gods, they loved them, because to fear meant to believe that the world was governed by purpose. The thunder wasn't random if it was Zeus. The sea's fury wasn't chaos if Poseidon commanded it. Fear gave them narrative, a sense that even suffering fit into some greater design. And in this way, fear became a form of comfort, a companion, not a curse. In the medieval world, fear grew quieter but more intimate. It moved from mountains and storms into the home and the heart. The invisible became personal. The devil was no longer a distant force. He could sit beside you, whisper in your ear, twist your dreams. Nightmares were not just bad dreams, they were visitations. The Latin word incubus meant to lie upon, and many believed that demons did just that, pressing down on the chest, stealing breath in the dark. What we now call sleep paralysis was, for them, proof that unseen forces moved freely between worlds. Imagine lying in a cold, dark room centuries ago. The fire has gone out. You wake in the middle of the night, unable to move. The air feels heavy. You sense something there, just beyond the edge of sight. You can't speak, you can't breathe, you can only wait. In those still hours, people found their myths. They didn't invent them out of ignorance, they built them out of experience. They were describing the human body and mind as best they could with the knowledge they had. And in that act, they turned fear into language. Superstition became a kind of poetry, a way of speaking to fear in metaphors and symbols. To ward off evil, people hung iron above doorways, wore amulets shaped like eyes or hands, placed salt in corners to trap wandering spirits. The rituals varied by culture, but the rhythm was the same. When fear came, you met it with something, a small gesture, a repetition, a word. Every act of superstition was a conversation with the invisible world. In some villages, people left food at crossroads for ghosts who had no home. In others, they avoided whistling at night, believing it would summon spirits. In Japan, paper talismans were tied to branches. In Europe, prayers were whispered over water before drinking it. Even silence had its place. The moment of stillness before lighting a candle, the pause before saying a name of someone who had passed. All of this came from the same place, the understanding that fear could be eased by ritual. The unknown didn't have to be destroyed. It could be respected. It could even be beautiful. As the centuries passed, the boundary between faith and superstition blurred. Churches, temples, and shrines all shared the same quiet knowledge that people needed symbols to hold on to when they faced the dark. In the flicker of a candle or the rhythm of a chant, fear became something sacred. You didn't have to understand the universe. You only had to keep the flame burning. During the late Middle Ages, people began to fear something new, not just death, but the idea of being forgotten. They believed that a soul could wander if its name was not spoken. So graves were visited, candles lit, prayers recited not just for the living, but for memory itself. Fear turned into remembrance. To remember someone became a form of protection, a promise that love was stronger than oblivion. Even today, we see traces of those fears everywhere. A wish made before blowing out candles, knocking on wood, crossing fingers, saying "bless you" after a sneeze. All of them small remnants of ancient dialogues with the unknown. Each one says softly, "I see you, fear. I respect you, but I will not let you rule me." For centuries, the supernatural offered answers that logic could not. When harvests failed, people looked for patterns in the stars. When ships vanished, they blamed sea monsters. When a child fell ill, they whispered that perhaps a fairy had taken it away. Beneath every tale was the same longing, to make sense of loss, to say that the world's cruelty was not random, but part of a story that one day might make sense. The folklore that grew from these fears was rich, textured, and strangely tender. The spirits weren't always evil. Many were simply echoes, lost wanderers, protectors, messengers. In rural Italy, people told of La Befana, an old woman who swept through the night sky, not to curse, but to bring small gifts to children. In Ireland, they spoke of banshees, whose cries foretold death, not to terrify, but to prepare the living for grief. Fear was not always about danger. Sometimes it was about awareness, about the thin line between the living and the dead. Even the landscape reflected this balance. Mountains became sacred. Forests became alive with presence. Rivers were seen as boundaries between worlds. Every sound in the natural world could mean something, and every silence too. When people heard thunder, they crossed themselves not in panic, but in recognition. When fog rolled across the fields, they said prayers, not out of fear, but out of respect. The world was a conversation, one they were careful never to interrupt. It is easy, from a modern world of electric light and science, to think of these fears as superstition, relics of ignorance. But if you listen closely, you realize they were not mistakes, they were metaphors. They were ways of expressing the deep human truth that we do not control everything, that we live and always have lived, surrounded by mysteries we cannot name. To believe in spirits was to believe that the world was alive. To believe in omens was to believe that life had meaning. Fear gave people permission to hope, because if dark forces were real, perhaps light was too. As you imagine these old worlds, picture a small village again, long after midnight. The moon is high. The fields shimmer faintly with dew. From one cottage, a candle still burns, a single point of gold in the darkness. Inside, a woman sits by her hearth, whispering a prayer over the bowl of water in her hands. She isn't afraid, not exactly. She is listening to the creak of wood, the breath of wind, the faint hum of something beyond her comprehension. She dips her fingers into the water, draws a small circle on her forehead, and exhales. The fear doesn't leave her. It softens. That is what fear once meant, not panic, but presence. A reminder that there's always something greater than us, watching, waiting, and perhaps even caring. When you think of those people, the priests and peasants, the mothers and mystics, try to imagine not their terror, but their wonder. To live in such a world was to see mystery in every movement of wind, meaning in every echo of thunder. It was not an age of fear. It was an age of attention. The unknown wasn't something to escape from. It was something to live beside, quietly, reverently, and with awe. And so, even as time passed and science grew louder, the old fears never truly disappeared. They changed their clothes, took on new names, but their essence remained. The awareness that for all our understanding, the world is still vast and we are still small. While peasants whispered prayers into the dark, the powerful lived in houses of stone, with guards at the gates and fires that never went out. Yet even there, in the thick walls of castles and palaces, fear was never far away. It simply wore different clothes. It hid behind curtains of silk and gold, behind ceremony and ritual, pretending to be control. The poor feared hunger and cold. The rich feared chaos, rebellion, and the fragility of everything they built to hold the world in place. Imagine the great hall of a medieval castle at night. The hearth burns high, filling the room with warmth and the smell of resin and smoke. Tapestries hang on the walls, embroidered with hunts and battles. Servants move quietly between the tables, pouring wine, tending the fire, speaking in low voices. A lord sits at the head of the room, his hands resting on carved oak, his eyes distant. He has everything: food, warmth, servants, and safety. and yet he cannot sleep. Beyond these walls there are wars, there are enemies, there are whispers of sickness, of witchcraft, of divine punishment. Even in the comfort of power, the same unease lingers, a reminder that no one commands the unseen. To live among the elite was to live surrounded by protection, but also by paranoia. Every piece of gold, every title, every promise of divine favor was a kind of armor against uncertainty. Kings were anointed not just with oil, but with the illusion of safety, the idea that their right to rule came from heaven itself. Yet the more power one held, the more delicate it felt. A single illness, a failed harvest, a rebellion, any of these could unmake a kingdom overnight. In royal courts, fear turned ceremonial. It hid within etiquette and superstition. Monarchs consulted astrologers before battles, carrying talismans stitched into their robes. Noblewomen wore amulets of coral or amber to ward off illness. Even the most powerful men refused to make decisions on unlucky days, waiting for the stars to align before signing treaties or launching ships. Behind the calm surface of power was an endless hum of anxiety. The belief that fate had to be appeased, that danger could be delayed by patience and precision. You might imagine the royal physician walking quietly through a candlelit corridor. His robe swishes against the floor. In his hands, a small vial of herbs, a charm carved from bone, a book of notes written in Latin. Behind a heavy door, the queen lies pale beneath sheets of linen. Courtiers whisper outside, afraid to enter, afraid to leave. No one speaks of death directly, but it hovers in the air like perfume. Fear here is quiet, dignified and constant, the fear of losing what the world believes cannot be lost. In palaces from London to Istanbul, from Beijing to Rome, fear was turned into architecture. Walls grew thicker, windows smaller, corridors longer and winding, designed to protect, to delay, to confuse intruders. Power created distance, not just from danger, but from the simple world outside. The poor feared ghosts in the woods. The kings feared ghosts in their lineage, curses whispered by the wronged, prophecies of downfall spoken by monks or mystics. A peasant might light a candle for safety. A monarch might build a cathedral for the same reason. The difference was only in scale. Yet even among rulers, some understood the futility of resistance. They accepted that fear could not be conquered, only managed. Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote quietly of this in a journal 2,000 years ago, that fear was not an enemy but a mirror, a teacher. The Stoics believed that peace came not from eliminating fear, but from living calmly beside it, accepting its place in the human heart. And perhaps that is why, even in their greatest luxury, some rulers built gardens of silence, places without noise or judgment, where water moved slowly over stone, and the only sound was the wind in the leaves. Fear in these higher places became something abstract. The poor feared the dark, the rich feared time. They built monuments and legacies to escape it, towers, statues, names etched into history. But the wind still passed through their halls, carrying the same chill it carried through every cottage. Time was the one fear that no wealth could silence. It crept quietly beneath crowns, beneath marble, beneath the weight of gold. Imagine standing inside the great hall of Versailles after midnight. The chandeliers have gone dark. The mirrors reflect only the faint light of the moon through the windows. The corridors are empty, the air still. Somewhere in the distance, a clock ticks. The echo seems endless. The building is magnificent, but in its silence there is something haunting, as if the grandeur itself is afraid of vanishing. You can almost feel the ghosts of those who once stood here, their footsteps soft, their conversations long faded. They too feared being forgotten. The fear of the powerful has always been quieter, more refined, but no less real. It is the fear of losing control, of being remembered wrongly, of building something vast only for it to crumble. Even the pyramids, monuments to eternal life, were born from the same impulse to deny decay. Yet time proved itself patient, unhurried, and undefeated. Dust gathers, ivy climbs, and every stone eventually returns to the earth. The irony is that those who seemed most fearless were often the most haunted. The generals who ordered wars still flinched at thunder. The queens who commanded nations still whispered charms against sickness. The emperors who ruled continents still dreamed of omens. A falling star, a dying bird, a strange dream that lingered too long. Their fear wasn't smaller than others. It was simply more hidden, tucked behind velvet and ritual. So while peasants prayed for protection and priests preached of divine wrath, the kings and queens prayed too, not for safety, but for certainty. Certainty that their power mattered, that the walls would hold, that their names would endure. But the world has always been built on uncertainty, and that is perhaps the truest fear of all, that nothing, no matter how grand, lasts forever. As the candle of history burns low, picture one final scene. A nobleman standing on the balcony of his castle, overlooking the dark fields below. The air is cold, carrying the scent of rain. He watches the horizon, where lightning flickers faintly in the distance. For a moment, he thinks of his ancestors, of the wars they fought, of the prayers they said in their own nights of uncertainty. He breathes slowly and realizes that the same wind touches both king and commoner. The same darkness falls for all. Fear, he thinks, is not a curse. It is the thread that ties all people together, the poor, the powerful, the forgotten. It reminds each of them that no wall is high enough, no fire warm enough to keep the unknown away forever. And somehow, that understanding brings peace. He turns from the balcony, steps back into the soft glow of his room, and closes the door behind him. Outside, the wind rises again. The torches along the walls flicker. But inside, the silence is deep, calm, and strangely safe. The story of fear does not end with kings and candles. It does not stop when the last plague passes or the last superstition fades. Fear has never truly gone away. It has simply changed its shape, grown quieter, more hidden, more polite. In every age, it adapts, like smoke curling into new corners. Today, our nights are brighter. Cities shimmer with light. The dark that once terrified entire villages has been chased to the edges of the world. We sleep beneath electric glow and believe we are safe. Yet if you listen closely, past the hum of machines, past the rhythm of traffic, past the low buzz of screens, you can still hear it. That same ancient silence, waiting between sounds. The same unease that once made our ancestors whisper prayers before sleep. Modern fear has no face. It no longer lurks in the woods or crouches beside the fire. It hums inside us, in our hearts, our thoughts, our endless what-ifs. We no longer fear the wolf at the door, but we fear the call that does not come, the future that refuses to take shape, the sudden reminder of how fragile everything still is. We have built cities of glass, networks of light, machines that speak for us. But the old instinct remains, curled quietly inside, unchanged for 100,000 years. In ancient times, fear was simple. It was hunger, cold, sickness, and the dark. It was gods and ghosts, wind and thunder. Now, it is more complicated, but not so different. It is the fear of loss, of uncertainty, of being forgotten. It is the quiet ache of being small in a vast world, the same feeling that made people once look to the stars and see meaning in their patterns. We do not call it superstition anymore. We call it anxiety, or loneliness, or existential dread. But its rhythm is the same. When you look at the world today, you can still trace the echoes of ancient fear in every habit we keep. We lock our doors at night, though few of us expect danger. We still knock on wood when we tempt fate. We still cross our fingers, make wishes, speak softly to the dead. We still invent stories, not of demons or curses, but of chance and luck, algorithms and fate. We still try, in every small way, to give shape to what we cannot control. Think about how quiet fear has become. It no longer shouts. It whispers through the constant noise of modern life, blending in until we barely notice it. The flicker of worry before sleep, the restlessness of thought, the sense that time is moving too quickly or that we are missing something unnamed. Fear no longer protects us from the wild. It protects us from emptiness. It keeps us reaching, striving, moving. And perhaps that is why we have never truly wanted to be rid of it. Our ancestors feared darkness, but in that darkness, they saw stars. They looked upward and felt both wonder and humility. Today, we rarely see those stars, but the feeling remains, that strange mix of awe and unease when faced with something larger than ourselves. The same feeling you might have standing on a balcony at night, looking out over a sleeping city. The hum of power lines replaces the rustle of the forest, but the stillness feels the same. If you could speak to the people of the past, the peasants who prayed through storms, the healers who whispered charms, the kings who feared the loss of legacy, they would recognize us instantly. Not by our clothes or our cities or our inventions, but by our hearts, because we still carry the same old questions. What is coming? Will it hurt? Will I be remembered? Will I be safe? The centuries have changed the language, but not the melody. Perhaps that is what makes fear so deeply human. It reminds us that we care about survival, about meaning, about one another. Every fear, even the quietest one, is built from love. The love of life, of family, of home, of time itself. Fear exists because something matters enough to lose. And that, when you think about it, is a gentle thing, not an enemy, but a companion. Imagine now that you are standing alone in the middle of the night, somewhere far from noise or light. The sky is deep and endless. The air is cool. You feel small, but not frightened. The same stars your ancestors once saw shine above you, unchanged. The same wind touches your skin. And in that moment, you realize that fear is not separate from peace. It is part of it, the shadow that makes light visible, the silence that gives meaning to sound. The story of fear is not a story of defeat. It is a story of endurance. It is the long history of how people learn to live beside uncertainty, with prayer, with science, with art, with love. It is the quiet strength of a creature who knows it is fragile and still chooses to dream. So, when you lie down tonight and the world grows still around you, listen carefully. You might hear the faint echo of your ancestors' voices in the dark, not warning you, not haunting you, but reminding you. They, too, lived through nights like this. They, too, waited for dawn. They, too, feared, and yet they survived. Outside, the wind moves softly through the trees. The walls around you hold steady. Somewhere, a clock ticks in its steady rhythm. the same rhythm that has carried every generation forward, through night, through fear, through time. And just as they did, you will wake again in the morning. The light will return. The fears of the night will fade like mist, and the story of fear, the endless patient human story, will continue, one quiet breath at a time. And so, the story of fear comes to rest, not with an ending, but with a sigh, a quiet exhale after a long journey through the shadows of time. You have walked beside peasants in their dark cottages, stood with priests in cold stone chapels, followed kings through candlelit halls, and drifted with philosophers beneath the vast sky of questions that never end. And now, the night has grown still again. Fear was never the villain of history. It was the teacher, the soft voice that reminded us how precious life is, how fragile, how full of wonder. Without fear, there would have been no courage. Without darkness, no longing for light. From the first spark of fire in a cave to the glow of modern cities, fear has always moved quietly alongside us, shaping our rituals, our stories, and the way we hold one another close in the dark. Imagine again that small, trembling candle at the center of our tale. It has burned through every century we've passed, from the hearths of peasants to the chambers of kings, through plague years and holy nights, through whispers of witches and the hum of prayers. Its flame has flickered, but never gone out. It burns still, even now, on your nightstand, in your screen, in your thoughts. The same fragile light, the same human need to see, to know that beyond the dark there is warmth. The people of the past are not gone. They are only quieter now. Their fears still echo softly in ours. The fear of being alone, of losing love, of time passing too quickly, these are not new. They are ancient. They are part of what it means to exist at all. And so, as you breathe here in the present, you are surrounded by the ghosts of those who once feared and hoped just as you do. They whisper not warnings, but understanding. They say, "We were afraid too, and it was all right." Outside, the wind moves gently through the trees. The air is still, the night deep. Perhaps there's a faint sound, a creak, a distant hum, a rhythm as old as the earth itself. You're not alone in this quiet. The same darkness that cradled your ancestors now surrounds you, calm and protective. The same stars that watched over them still shine above. In this moment, there is no past or present, only stillness, only breath, only the slow turning of the world. Let the weight of time fall away. Let the noise of thought soften. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to hold on to fear. It has done its work. It has kept you alive, alert, aware. Now it can rest. The candle of history burns low, but its light remains steady. Each flicker, each heartbeat, a reminder that life continues, always learning, always reaching, always breathing. As your eyes grow heavier, imagine the flame dimming, not dying, just folding into sleep. The room cools, the sounds fade. Somewhere, far beyond, a bell tolls softly, the last sound of the waking world. And you drift, gently, into the quiet that every human before you has known. The quiet after fear, the quiet before dawn. Rest now, as they once did. The night is vast, but it is kind, and in its stillness, you are safe.